It is completely normal for children to struggle with the ways in which it appears that their brother or sister is getting away with things, or that there is this double standard that is forming as you implement accommodations in your home. So this understanding of fair does not mean equal. Not only is it essential, but it is going to be much easier for you to explain if you are confident in why you're doing what you're doing. Why do your two children, for example, require different parenting from you and different support from you? Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and today's episode is part 2 in a 2-part series. It's all about supporting the siblings in your home. So if you've not listened to part 1, it was episode 36, I want to encourage you to hit pause on this episode. And you can go back and listen to that episode first. It's about 15 minutes long or so. And then come back to us here, okay? Because part 1 was looking at the sibling experience and getting clear on the different layers of that experience. And part 2 today is about what you can do in your role as a parent to support the siblings with that information in mind, okay? So today's episode will make a lot more sense if you go back and listen to part 1. I want to begin with the caveat that you will want to take these suggestions in today's episode and adjust them so that they are age appropriate. Now, kids at a very young age can begin to have these conversations and understanding of their brother or sister through a brain first lens, but you'll want to introduce these ideas and conversations or topics in ways that align with their developmental age. So, I want to begin with one of the elements of the sibling experience that I talked about in part 1, which was that their experience often mirrors our experience, right? The parent experience. Basically, what I mean by that is how we talk about our kids who struggle with the challenging behavioral symptoms. It really, really matters. You may be at the very beginning of understanding this for yourself, and that's okay. This is just my encouragement to you to keep going, so that you can speak more confidently about your child from a brain first lens as you are talking to the siblings in your home. One thing related to this that I highly recommend parents do as a family is talk about how all brains work differently. We're all somewhere different on that neurodiversity spectrum, and what it means to have a brain that works differently in a world that does not recognize or accommodate for that. So you're not singling out the brother or sister who struggles, you're normalizing brain differences in your family, and then talking about what that means for each person in your family, which will inevitably lead to the brain differences that their brother or sister experience. Kids can begin to understand this idea that brains work differently at a very young age, and then they have the opportunity to grow into a more sophisticated understanding as they get older. So there's no age that's too early, I don't think, to begin talking with siblings about this in relation to their brother or sister who struggles. I can remember, I actually remember exactly where I was when I had this very conversation with my own neurotypical son, who's now 18. And this conversation was about his sister, who's 15 months younger than him and has a serious neurobehavioral condition. He was a kindergartner at the time, and my reason for having this conversation, how I could tell that it was time to have the conversation, was he was voicing a lot of frustration about his sister's behavior. And I knew it was directly tied to her differences, things that she didn't have the skills for, things that she didn't have any control over. And so that was the reason why I began the conversation, and it began when he was, 5 or 6 years old. This understanding of their brother or sister with the siblings in your family, it ideally will develop over time, meaning it is a conversation that if you have the gift of time, I want you to be able to embrace that, right? Having these conversations regularly and consistently over time. Now, I'm not suggesting that once the siblings in the family have this information and understanding that it will magically make them okay with what's happening in terms of their brother or their sister's challenging behaviors and what that might mean for their home environment. But with that acknowledgement, it really does set a foundation that I think is essential. And in many ways, it's as essential for them as it is for us as parents, right? It's not to excuse the behavior and the hard things about it. It's really to help them make sense of it and give them some context. I do recommend that parents, again, have these conversations early and often and consistently. And if you can, have these conversations at a time when things aren't escalated or at a time when you're not coming right out of a really challenging situation with their brother or sister. If it's done at a time that is not attached to a challenging moment, there's less of a chance of them interpreting it as you just making excuses for their brother or sister's behavior. There's likely to be more openness if it's not associated with something that just happened, right? Especially something that happened that was scary or hurtful or frustrating for them. You can also do this education and these conversations about brains working differently and the connection to behavior while at the same time acknowledging what they are thinking and feeling. Like, hey, I know that this doesn't magically make everything better. I know it's still really hard for you. Yeah, you're right. What they did was not okay. And also, I want you to have a bit more information about their differences, their disability, because that really matters too, in terms of understanding what's happening with them. Now, a second suggestion is to recognize and validate these very normal feelings that they have, the siblings have, that things are not fair and things are not equal, while also helping them understand that fair does not necessarily mean equal. It is completely normal for children to struggle with the ways in which it appears that their brother or sister is getting away with things or that there is this double standard that is forming as you implement accommodations in your home. So this understanding of fair does not mean equal, not only is it essential, but it is going to be much easier for you to explain if you are confident in why you're doing what you're doing. Why do your two children, for example, require different parenting from you and different support from you? So the way I would talk about this with my son is that in our home, fair means mom and dad give both you and your sister exactly what you need to be happy and to thrive and to feel safe and to feel included. But this is going to look very different for each one of you because you have very different needs and you're two very unique, different people. So fair does not mean the same. Fair does not mean equal. What I was communicating to him was that fairness really comes down to meeting his brain and his nervous system with what it needs and doing the same for his sister, right? Not matching outcomes. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that your kids will just accept this from you at face value. I mean, there's adults who have a really hard time accepting this and understanding it. So knowing that these conversations will require a lot of empathy, balanced with confidence and clarity, right, in what you're explaining to them. We don't have to have this conversation anymore in our home. And I honestly can't remember the last time we had this conversation. It's been a very long time. And I'd like to think it's because it was a conversation we had in bits and pieces repeatedly over many, many years. And this is where I want to add something that often gets missed when we're talking about fair does not mean equal. When we say fair doesn't mean equal, that can only feel settling to a child if we also explain why things are different, right? So again, getting clarity on why are you doing things differently with your kids who have very different needs. equality without explanation can feel very unsafe to kids. If they see different rules, different consequences, different accommodations, and no one helps them make sense of it, their brain fills in the blanks, right? And those blanks often sound like, well, she's the favorite, or I matter less, or the rules are random. What creates security in a family isn't sameness, it's predictability and meaning. So when we can calmly and consistently and clearly explain the why behind our decisions, we help our kids understand that the system makes sense and that their place in the family is secure and that the differences in support are around needs, right? Not about worth. So a perfect concrete example of this would be helping the siblings in your family understand why you are making the conscious decision to not address their brother or sister's challenging behaviors in the moment. Sharing with them that you will address it, but it's going to happen later. You're going to circle back. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about when I mention circling back, I'm going to include a blog post in the show notes that will explain that process and the rationale behind it so that you can learn a little more about it there. In part 1, we talked about how for some siblings, the experience of living with these intense and unpredictable or aggressive behaviors, it can cross this line from stressful into genuinely traumatic. And that recognizing the impact of that on them is essential. When a child has felt scared or unsafe or chronically on edge in their own home, their nervous system may need intentional support to heal and to recover. Now, the good news, and I mentioned this in part 1, is that there are powerful protective factors that can support that healing practice and that healing process. So I want to talk about those for a moment. One is consistent one-on-one time with a regulated, safe person. Ideally a regulated parent, but I'm going to talk in a minute about why that might not be possible and what you might need to do instead. Okay, so one-on-one time with a regulated, safe adult. This doesn't have to be elaborate. It could be as simple as you making the conscious effort to turn off your phone, tuning into them, going for a walk. There's no agenda, time with them, right? Just being present. If you are fortunate enough to live in a 2-parent household, coming up with a concrete plan that really schedules out how this is going to happen. And I say this because it can seem so obvious on the surface, but I know that families like yours that have a lot going on with a child who really struggles and has some complex needs, that this just can get easily overlooked in the busyness and kind of the chaos of day to day to day. And so having this concrete plan with your partner that really carves out this specific time can give it a greater chance of it actually happening. Now, maybe you are not in a 2-parent home, or maybe you are in a 2-parent home, but the needs of your child really does require both of you some of the time or much of the time. So is there another safe adult, a family member, a very close friend who is in the position of being able to do this one-on-one time with your sibling and your family? I know that for many of you, there are family members who may not be in the position to care for your child who struggles because their struggles are too big, right, for that family member to manage. So maybe they can fill this role. Can they take the sibling kids to just give them some respite and give them some of that one-on-one time that every child needs? Another protective factor is having a clear and detailed safety plan so that the siblings in your home, they know exactly what to do if things begin to escalate. So they know where they're going to go. They know what to do when they go to that place. They know the word or the signal from you that indicates it's time to put this plan in place and you need to go there or do whatever you have decided upon already. This will also help with that parentification that we talked about in the first part of this 2-part series. If they have a plan that you have developed and you've been very clear with them, this is what I need you to do, and you don't need to worry about me. You just need to follow the plan. I'm going to be okay because I have a plan too. That safety plan can really help with that as well. A third protective factor when we're thinking about helping the siblings heal from trauma is providing them with an open space to process their feelings without minimizing them. So validating their feelings, giving them full permission to voice their true feelings and concerns. When we are able to validate their experiences, then they know that their experience is important and what they have to say means something. They feel more heard. They feel less alone. They feel like somebody gets it. This is when they begin to be able to voice these statements that maybe they've been holding inside for a really long time. Things like, sometimes I wish I didn't have a brother. Life would be so much easier. Or I hope my sister never comes home from the hospital. I'm glad she's gone. Those thoughts feel more manageable when we, as their parents, can say, I get it. Right? I understand why you would feel that way. And it's okay to feel that way. I know that you can love your sister and also hope that she never comes home from the hospital. Showing up in this way for our sibling children, what it requires is for us to do our own hard work, to process our own feelings related to our parenting experience. It's very hard to hold this space and to truly hear these things from our sibling children if we haven't done our own work, right? So just like with any of us, when our sibling kids are given this permission to feel that whole range of emotions that being the neurotypical sibling can contain, they can then begin to work through those emotions in healthy ways, okay? You don't have to do this alone. If you have access to, for example, a very skilled child therapist who can help the sibling process what they're going through, develop coping skills, that is amazing. It's support for the siblings, which is important, but it's also an added support for you. Okay. Another important way to support the siblings in the family is to avoid asking them, this is overtly or inadvertently, asking them to keep secrets about the challenges that are happening in your home and what is happening with their siblings. Kids should never have to keep secrets, especially about scary things that are happening at home. And even if you don't mean to communicate this, many parents don't realize that by not having intentional conversations about this, they are messaging, hey, we don't talk about this. This isn't something we mention. So instead, I'd encourage you to have intentional family discussions on how to talk to others about your child's health, about their brain-based difference, about the behavioral symptoms, and come up with a clear plan on how the siblings in your family can communicate to those who are close to them and talking about who those people are. Maybe there's different levels of disclosure that happen with different people, like mutual friends or the siblings' teachers or neighbors. You'll want to be sure to have this conversation so they're not left on their own to figure this out. You want to avoid any situation where you unintentionally are leaving your sibling child on their own to try to answer questions about their brother or sister or explain their brother or sister's situation to others. All right, last but definitely not least, if anything, this is actually the most important piece of all the suggestions that I've given you, all the actions that you can possibly take. And it is to provide yourself with self-compassion and grace as you navigate the complexities of this very specific part of your parenting experience. The absolute very best thing that we can do to support the siblings in our family unit, the thing that will have the greatest positive impact, is to take care of our own emotional, physical, spiritual well-being. I say this often, that the care we give ourselves needs to match the intensity of our very unique parenting experience. I know that's easier said than done, but I'm going to continue to say it. When we feel grounded in our experience, like the grief that we talked about in part 1 of this 2-part series, as difficult as it is to face something like the grief experience, it is so necessary, right? So that we can work through it and come out the other end, the other side of it, so that when our sibling kids come to us with their own grief, we can hold it for them. We can manage it. We don't get swallowed up by it, right? It puts us in a better position to be able to support those around us who are also very impacted by this experience, but may not have the skills or the perspective to manage it. If nervous system healing, resilience building is lower on your priority list, because for very good reason, right? You're overwhelmed by the needs of others in your home and other life stressors outside of your home. I want you to know that there are things you can do in moments a day to begin to build your own resilience. The hardest part oftentimes is just beginning. There is a Brain First Parenting podcast episode. It's episode 19, and it talks about resilience, and it also talks about the concrete ways to begin building your resilience. Again, things that I think of as drops in the bucket. They take moments a day, but they do build over time. So I'll be sure to include that episode in the show notes so that you can reference it there. Alrighty. I hope this 2-part series on supporting siblings was helpful to you. I hear from parents all the time about how stressful, how heartbreaking this part of their parenting journey is. And so know that if that is the case for you, my heart goes out to you, and you are far, far, far from alone in that experience. Okay, thanks as always for listening in and being here. And until next time, take care. Hey, if you found today's episode helpful in any way, I'd like to ask a quick favor of you, and that is that you take just a moment to share this episode on Instagram or Facebook, the 2 places where I hang out most. By doing this, you will help me reach more parents who are really needing reassurance that they are not alone and that there is information out there that can help their family heal. Thanks so much in joining me in my efforts to reach them and support them. It is so appreciated.